Hi everyone, and welcome to another Jasiri Network LinkedIn Live session. Today I'm in conversation with Tobi. Tobi is the co-founder of Venture for Africa, an organization at the forefront of building Africa's future talent infrastructure. And Toby's work spans various things. So it spans recruitment, talent strategy, go-to-market design, and community-led growth across African startup ecosystem. And I think we'll talk about it a little bit more because they have this amazing social that he calls talent social every month, and it's been an amazing kind of like really community led initiative to see being run by Toby and the rest of the team. He's played a very pivotal role in helping startups scale with the right people, designing programs for learning and founder support, and structuring the chaos of early stage growth into scalable systems. And a very interesting fact is Toby is a trained engineer turned talent strategist. Toby has worked across Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, South Africa, and Cote d'Ivoire, and now calls Nairobi home. Welcome to the session, Toby. How are you and where are you tuning in from?
Hi, thanks, Nancy. Pleasure to be here. So I am tuning in from Nairobi this time around. I know last time we spoke, I was somewhere else, but yeah, I'm in Nairobi now.
True. The last time we spoke, we've spoken several times. The first time we spoke, you were in Accra, Ghana. The next time we spoke,
Mm-hmm.
you were in Nairobi, Kenya. And then the last time we spoke, you were in London, in the
Yeah,
UK. We won't get
yeah.
into the specifics, hopefully later. But now I want to kind of just go through some very quick fire round questions. Five, nothing crazy. To just kind of like get warmed up and then start our discussion. The first question
So,
is, what's the most unexpected skill you picked up working in recruitment?
hmm, most
Hmm.
unexpected skill.
Yeah.
So it's very difficult for me to, I know it's supposed to be quick fire questions, but I complicate things a lot
Hmm.
because I'm quite a deep and reflective person. So a lot of things are not necessarily unexpected. But I would say, maybe putting myself out there to talk to people like a lot is something I've picked up um, by the nature of the work that I do. I'm kind of an introvert, which people don't believe, but yeah. So I think that's probably one next unexpected skill that I maybe I'll say I've picked up. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Introverts, I think introverts make the best leaders, the best people in HR, because then you're able to sort of like have a very one-on-one conversational deep conversation opposed to like extroverts. I am kind of like a bit of both, but like I love my introverted bit more. Okay, Lagos or Nairobi, which one do you thrive in?
Thrive in. I'll say Nairobi.
I wasn't expecting that because Lagos is home.
Really?
Yeah.
Lagos. Oh well. So Lagos isn't home. Ibadan
Oh,
is
okay.
home, but technically Nairobi for all intents and purposes Nairobi.
Okay. If you weren't doing anything in talent or in startups, what would you be doing instead?
Probably something in the creative space. So that could be anything from it could be anything, honestly. Shooting movies, it could be being in movies, it could be just the creative space, making music as well. I think that would have been another point of call for me.
That's interesting. I was expecting you to mention something in engineering. Like, come on, Toby. A whole
Yeah.
degree in
Well,
engineering.
maybe,
Maybe.
but that would come like in third place.
Okay, fair enough. One book, and I ask this question very often, almost to every guest. So, one book, podcast, or documentary that changed how you think about work.
I would say how I think about work.
Hmm.
Not very specifically. I would say how I think about life in general, but
Okay.
I'll say I I can do work one. So I think the rework book by the folks from Base Camp. That's probably one. One thing is that I don't really like superlative questions where you have to pick only one thing because one thing
Okay,
is
give
never
me
going to be
several.
enough.
Give me several
Yes, okay.
then.
So I'll do the rework book. I think that was quite interesting because it talked a little bit around, we have this perspective of how our days need to go. You have to work 5 days a week and all of that. Even before COVID came and remote work came, these guys were already rethinking the way you do work in a sustainable and, explicit way. I would say another one is I keep forgetting, but Thinking Fast and Slow by Dan Kahneheim. I think that was
I
also
think I
like a
have
good
that
book.
book actually.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not so much about work in particular, but it's just, about how to think and just how you process things as well. And one, I would just special mention to how to make the most of your 20s. And so this is a book by Dr. Meg J, and it's just
I've
about
read it.
yeah, exactly. It's a really good book, and I
Yeah.
reference it a lot. And it's just around navigating decisions in life in general. And final special mention, it's called The Computer Science of Human Decisions, um, or I think that's the subtitle. But I think it's called Algorithms for Thinking, or Algorithms for Human Decisions. And just the way, if you think about the way computers work, there's things we can learn about that apply to how we operate. But yeah, I can nerd out about a few of these things, but those are the four books I would say are quite
Yeah.
quite been important for me.
Great selection. Another question, which is the last one. And because I asked this question because you do travel quite a bit, and you've not just traveled, but you've lived in several cities, right? So this is a kind of like one of my favorite questions. What's your one local dish from your travels across Africa that you can't get enough of?
Local dish. So,
Yes.
disclaimer: I'm not a food person. I don't think
Really?
about food. Yeah, I don't think about food the way people do, where they're like, "Oh my God, food is a very functional experience for me." So this question,
Like
like,
you just need the food to do its job. You just need your protein.
yeah, yeah.
Like do
So
the
yeah,
job.
so exactly, there are things I enjoy, but I don't like. There's only a couple of things that make me go like, "Oh yeah." So, local dish.
Hmm.
Huh. I haven't had anything here that I really, really like that is local. So
That
no
is
shade to
Nairobi.
Kenya. Yeah.
Okay.
And obviously, and the other places I've been, like the UK, like food is not necessarily great in the UK. So
I like food in the UK.
yeah, you're Kenyan, I guess you'd say that. So like it's like
Toby,
I'm
don't
sorry,
make
I
me
just have
end
to throw
this
shade.
session right now.
I have to throw shade at you. I'd say I think a good curry would get me there.
Okay.
So really a really good curry with some really soft and buttery naan. I think
Okay.
that would
So is
be
that more
something
Indian or
local.
like more West African curry?
Indian curry. No, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, obviously the West African food, I would always like a few things there. But if we're talking about other local dishes, I'd say yeah,
Yeah.
Indian.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Well, that's a great way to end the quick fire round. I'm not very pleased, especially though you're taking me to Nairobi, but it's okay. It's okay. So I wanted us to kind of talk
Yeah.
a little bit about your career journey and transition. Like I mentioned, you did engineering academically, but then now you're in the recruitment and talent space. But kind of like, how did that path evolve? Was this something you had planned out? Because I would assume if you're going to school to do engineering, which is a very, I'm assuming very technical course, and then for you to go almost 360 degrees to do something else, how did that evolve and how did you get where you are from engineering?
From engineering. So I've told the story a bunch of different times, but let me do the super highlighted version of it. Always wanted to do civil engineering. Found myself in, well, always wanted to do it. Changed my mind to do architecture at some point, but eventually got into school to do civil engineering. But by my fourth year, when I was in the middle of like a 1 year internship, it was supposed to be 6 months, but schools in Nigeria sometimes go on strike. And so the strike happened while I was on an internship, and so it made me spend 1 year, which was a really good year because what it meant was I really got to experience life as an engineer. And this was, a year before my graduation. And I think I just looked around and everyone was like, it was a really good space, it was really good company, and people were doing great things there. But I just couldn't see myself there um, long term. Right. I looked at it and I was like, yeah, I don't think I can give 15, 20 years of my life to this. And so from that moment, I had 1 more year to go in school, but I started to think about all the other things I could potentially do. And so when I graduated, I, funny enough, I used my engineering and my background to get a role. But the point was I was trying to do a master's and get it out of the way. But I knew that to get a master's, I needed to sort of get into work a little bit. So I wasn't just coming straight out of school. But it was very difficult to find an engineering job at the time I was looking for something. And so the easiest thing to find at the time was like startup jobs. And I was already in and around the space because I used to dabble into coding at some point. And so I eventually joined a startup. But what that then did was just open my eyes to a lot more things. Because again, like I said, I was already looking outside of engineering, but I didn't really know what next. Because again, the thing about having multiple skills is you get spoiled for choice in terms of what you can do, particularly early on. So, anyways, joined the startup and just really opened my eyes into what was possible in the space in terms of my idea of entrepreneurship at the time was, you have a long career, maybe with Shell, with some big company, and then when you're 60, you retire, but you can still work. So you start your own thing, which is what my dad did, right? And a few other people around me had done. So I think that was the idea of business. And then you then have the hustlers, the people in your class that are selling clothes, doing a few things, building websites. But this was the first time I saw like young people building things that were actual businesses that were paying taxes, that were registered, that were opening up in different markets. I think that then opened my eyes into what was possible in the space, and I decided to stay in the space. Now, specifically talent, that just came around like when you can do many things. An organization I used to work for, a gap opened up on the people team, but it wasn't necessarily like HR and recruitment. It was more admissions. So it was a organization that got entrepreneurs on for a 1 year program and then invested in them. And so they needed someone to drive recruitment, but every recruiter they spoke to either treated it too much like they were recruiting for a job, or somebody treated it too much like school. And so this was one of those roles where they needed someone who understood the organization. And I was like, sure, I'll do it. And then again, no experience in people stuff or whatever. But I think by nature, I understand people and know how to talk to people. And I think that's a core of what, recruiting and trying to get people to make certain decisions, is. But yeah, that's a slightly long version of how I find myself here.
No, I quite like it, and it's true when you have so many interests or so many skills, it can seem like it's a blessing, but at the same time, it can be quite a challenge to just pick one thing to do at any one
Mm,
time. Though I think at the same time, it's a blessing because you get to have options to try as many things as you want, and then pick one that resonates with you. And again, in terms
mm,
of engineering, because coming from big four accounting or even consulting, I've seen a lot of engineers actually go through some of these big consulting companies, and the thinking behind it, and even not just in engineering, but even STEM, it's because of the nature of the course in uni and the structure, and just how again a lot of people are very thinkers, because when you're looking at engineering, when you're looking at a lot of like statistics, economics, a lot of
mm.
like STEM stuff, there's a lot of critical thinking, there's a lot of initiative from an individual, which can be applied across various industries. So I think it's
Yeah.
as much as somebody is doing engineering, you can also explore other roles or other industries that you feel would be a great fit. So yeah, I think that's a great example, honestly.
Yeah. Cool. Just checking.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that it's live on LinkedIn. Do
Oh,
you want to
really?
check if that's,
Let me
yeah,
check. I do get that a lot. We are
yeah,
live.
it says, okay. For some reason here it says starting soon. So maybe that's
Oh,
just,
okay. So let me just repost this then, so that it comes to people's feed, and I'll also just tag you. This is how
yeah,
you know we
all
are
right.
live.
Yeah, just wanted
Yeah.
to be
No,
sure.
that's fine. Thank you for the heads up. Let me repost this and then tag you as well.
So
I love how you're just including Swahili words in conversation.
yeah, no, but like it's all around. I started to be fair, I started to say saw even before I got here.
Really?
So yeah, because so for context, a lot of the work that we do involves a lot of work in East Africa. So
Mhm.
I think even though I was living in Ghana, I was technically doing a lot of work, here. So
Mm,
yeah, yeah, it's always a cool word, and Swahili is a cool language. So let's let's get to it.
okay,
Cool.
perfect. I've just done like a quick repost. So yeah, we're actually live.
Okay. Okay. Perfect. Just checking.
Perfect. No, no, that's great. I think before we go into it, and before we even discuss venture for Africa, which is currently what you're doing, and I want us to go back because you used to lead recruitment and also talent efforts across various organizations in multiple countries. I think we've touched Nigeria, Ghana, South Africa, and you've also mentioned Kenya. But like, what made you take the leap to start something of your own? And again, this is something that you're done for 5 plus years, and then
Mm,
just making the jump to venture for Africa.
yeah. Um, Honestly, it wasn't a dramatic decision. It
Hmm.
wasn't anything like, yeah, I'll just say it wasn't dramatic. So essentially, I was working in and around, I want to say recruitment, but let's just call it talent acquisition. And we'll get into
Okay.
this whole thing of, because earlier on before this conversation, you mentioned human resources, and technically that's not what I do, and always like to like differentiate, the two things very specifically. But anyways, um, did a lot of recruitment with Mest, and in that light, there was always a thought of, when you're surrounded by lots of entrepreneurship, you're also starting to think about, okay, like, is this something I could do as well? I've never been like a visionary in terms of, okay, I have an idea and I want to like, bring it to life, bring people together. I'm more of an executioner. And so I was working with my managing director at the time. We would always have these conversations about some of the gaps that we're seeing, the things that we could potentially do. And so Venture for Africa started from there. It's actually funny. So we went on a trip to Diani, actually, here in Kenya, and that was where the idea came from, in terms of, okay,
For
like,
people who might not know
let's
where Diani is, where is
oh,
Diani?
sorry. So Diani is on the coast of Kenya. It's in Mombasa, and so it's yeah, very nice coastal city. There's Diani, there's Malindi, there's
Watamu,
Lamu,
place
Watamu.
Kilifi.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. So exactly, it's all those coastal cities. So anyways, so we're there, and we just had a conversation around, okay, let's see what we can do. And so Venture for Africa started as like a side project sort of thing, in terms of, yeah, let's see what we can do in terms of connecting people to the growing startups we're seeing. So just to give context, we were working with a lot of early stage companies, but then as the ecosystem was growing, in terms of the tech ecosystem here in Africa, there started to be a lot of much bigger companies needing much more refined talent. But the issue was, there wasn't really a very clear way for them to find their ways into the spaces. So for talent to find their way to these startups, because now the problem is very, very different, which is why we've had to pivot. But in 2020, 2019, 2018, startups weren't as attractive. Like, not everybody was leaving big banks or leaving corporates to go to do startups. It would usually be the very, very ambitious people and the very like innovative entrepreneurial people that will make those kind of leaps. And so what we're trying to do was to create a pathway for more regular people, for the lack of a better way to describe it, to transition into startups. And so that's kind of like how Venture for Africa started. And so COVID happened, everybody was making big decisions during COVID. For me, it just made sense, because I was already thinking of moving to Kenya at the time, even though I didn't eventually do it. But it just made sense to close the chapter that I was in at the time, because a lot of changes were also happening at the organization I was, and then just see if this was something that could come to life. It was originally supposed to be like a 6 month experiment, but 5 years later, I'm here speaking to you. So yeah.
I think that's amazing. And I think you've mentioned about, us being able to differentiate between like HR, recruitment, and what you're doing. Why don't you
Mm.
break it down for us? Kind of like give us the differentiating factors of all these different terms we hear around talent, and also share a little bit more about Venture for Africa and what it is specifically that you guys do.
Yeah, absolutely. So human resources, it's an all-encompassing term, and it involves a lot of different parts. It involves recruitment, as we know, is talent acquisition, but it also involves like people management, employee benefits, and all these sorts of things, and performance management as well. And
Culture
so
as
when you
well.
exactly, so HR, for the way we use the term quite a lot now, tends to be a lot internal focused. So you're focused on the organization internally and making things work internally. Talent acquisition and recruitment tends to be a lot external and more external facing. And so you're less concerned. Usually, the talent acquisition and recruitment team, once the person gets on board into the team, that's not their business anymore. It's the people team that then figures out how you make all of those things happen. Now, some teams blend that, because, again, you don't want to hire too many different departments. So everything just tends to sit in HR. But it's slightly separate, and a lot of organizations tend to separate, talent acquisition from the people team in that sort of way. So that's kind of like why I like to. And to be fair, I don't necessarily want to be referred to as an HR person because I'm not. And there's a whole other thing that comes into that as well. And even
Yeah.
the recruitment that we do, we also approach it very different, which is why we also call it talent acquisition. But again, someone else can hear it and be like, "You're just saying all these words. It's the same thing." I'm like,
Yeah.
"Okay, cool, fair enough." But in terms of what VFA does, so right now we describe ourselves as a talent accelerator. And if you're familiar with the startup ecosystem, you understand what startup accelerators do. So, for context, a startup accelerator is a space where early stage companies or companies at different stages get into a space where there's a lot of support that allows them grow quickly. So that could be support in terms of financing, in terms of operational talent, strategy, partnerships, just everything. So there are these programs that call themselves accelerators. So we do exactly the same thing, but for talent. So we help talent do three things: to get jobs, to get promotions, and to build and launch ideas. So that's what it's evolved into over the last couple of years, 18 months thereabouts. Prior to this, we just called ourselves a talent platform or a program. We started off as a fellowship essentially to help mid-career professionals transition into working with fast-growing startups. And so in reality, that's still the case. But now we've just, obviously as you build and as you add more things to what you do, there's a lot more refinement to what it's called. And right now we're going with the phrase talent accelerator. Yeah.
Amazing. I like it. The new words in the blog. I kind of like it. And speaking of like the rare startups and you working with the entrepreneurs and also founders, what are some of the common mistakes early stage companies make in hiring, and what have you kind of like what can they do differently? I know there are a couple of things I'm guilty of, but yeah, what are some of the most common mistakes people make?
So I don't want to really call them mistakes because some
Mhm.
of it is just part of the journey.
Yeah.
And
The growing
as an early stage,
pains.
exactly. And as an early stage startup, like there's a lot of constraints that you have that means you have to do certain things yourself. Um, but I think, sometimes some of the big mistakes is really when you think about the job and the role that you want to hire for, the most important part is actually discovering what actually needs to be done and building out a job description that matches what you need to be done. A lot of people just, I'm looking for a product manager, and then they go online, Google product manager job description, you take it and you dump it in there, and it's quite generic. So I think generic job descriptions are one of the lowest hanging fruits, but one of the things that people tend to not focus on because you're so focused on really getting this person. The other mistake I see a lot of early stage founders make is not adding structure to the recruitment process, meaning you go with vibes. And so vibes are great, gut feeling is great, but those habits stay with you, which means as you grow bigger, you're still operating solely on vibes. And so it's really good to get yourself to think about process early on. And I'm not asking you to pay for an ATS or anything, but just have a structured way of thinking about, if I need to hire for a position and I'm speaking to five people, I should speak to five people the same way so that I'm getting the same results. Because if you speak to someone in a little bit more friendly manner, and you come away from that conversation feeling like, okay, this person is great, but then you speak to someone else who isn't as outgoing, you need to be able to define that that's what's happening. Not that the person isn't great, but the fact that it's just different personalities going on. But if you don't document that, if you're not even aware upfront of the kind of things you're looking for, the vibes will definitely lead you to some very vibey places sometimes when you're trying to scale. So I'll stop there, but those are like some of the two big ones in terms of not
Okay.
being very specific about what you're looking for, but also not having a structured process even when you're quite small.
Okay, so for people who are kind of just starting to hire, what are some of the structures you somebody can put in place? I think you've mentioned about making sure you're asking the same sort of questions to everybody that's you're hiring, but what else? And also I think you've mentioned documentation. What are some of the structures somebody can put in place? And this is from 0 to 5 to 100. What are some of those structures that can grow with the company?
Yeah, so funny enough, I wrote an article about 5 years ago that kind of like details this in a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But essentially, it's think about figure out the different stages in your process. Like, what do you need to know to be able to make a confident decision that this person is the right person for the job? So obviously, the job description. Then, if you're saying this is what my process is, job description, phone interview. case study or whatever, and then a final interview to run through the case study. Whatever process it is that is important to you that you think is important, just document that and have that as the standard that you go through, and then follow it once you put it up, right? Because sometimes you can create the process and then you don't follow it. But essentially, add, essentially when you're going to go through your process, I always say document your interviews. So right now we have all these tools available, transcripts. So you can actually, it's easier, it's much easier. When I wrote the article 5 years ago, it was the fact that you had to put in a lot of effort to do these things. So in terms of structure, I just think it's have a due process and follow the due process, and as many tools that can make your life easier, think of how they implement in the process. So things like calendar scheduling, things like obviously the tool that you use to take the call, the transcripts that you can add, and also having like a rubric that you might fill out after or during the call as well, just to make sure you're tracking things in a repetitive manner. And then, yeah, I think those are the smallest things, and those are things I'll say, regardless of what stage you are, 0 to 1 or 5 or 100. These are the principles that kind of apply. Yeah.
Okay. Well, still talking about the recruitment process, there's some startups and even some big companies that will put you through five, six stages of interviews. What are your thoughts? How many stages does somebody have to go through before this company's is like, okay, yeah, I think this would be a great fit. Should it take five interview rounds? Should it take three? And also kind of the time and resources that goes into it, because recruitment is quite an expensive process for some of these big organizations, and also for the people being applying for some of these jobs. You could have people who are quite talented and then like looking at this 6-step recruitment process and like, I couldn't be bothered. So
Yeah.
where do you find the good medium?
Yeah. So this one is a tricky one because I think you also have to understand what is incentivizing any stakeholder or player to add processes in there. You'd be surprised that the reason maybe 1 or 2 interviews exist is because of the hierarchy in the organization, and essentially they want you to speak to everybody on every level, and for whatever reason they have like 5 or 6 levels, and you
Six.
realize a lot of
Oh,
times.
six, Toby.
Yeah, but again, I'm not. It's not great because what you also realize as a candidate is that you're actually going through the same process just with different people.
Yeah.
So it's like by the time you get to stage 4 or 5, you're pretty much having the same conversation over and over again, just with a different person. And so that's more a detriment to the organization and just how they set up their process. But ideally, I think what I even said earlier on, it depends on the role and depends on the level of seniority. But the more senior the role is, the less the interviews are actually focused on skills checking and things like that. It's more on like vibes and if this makes sense
Yeah.
strategically for us, right? But ideally, standard process for mid to senior level roles is obviously the initial conversation with the recruiter, just to get a general sense of compensation expectations, what you're thinking about, just very basic conversations. The next one is probably going to be with the hiring manager, depending on how big the organization is. It will be the person that you're actually going to be working with, or is that is hiring for the role. So some candidates, sometimes you don't realize that the recruiter is really just processing information. They don't really have any strategic say in what happens, and that's the hiring manager. After the hiring manager conversation, typically you have some sort of activity like a case study or something, just to validate the things that you're saying. Then there's probably going to be another interview where you walk through that case study, and then the final conversation usually would typically be with the founder, or depending on how big the organization is, the most senior person in the department that you're going to work on. Now, that is pretty much like a 4 or 5 stage process. And that pretty much, again, the point is not the number of stages, but it's like how different are the stages from each other, which is what you should think about as both talent and both the person who's hiring, right? No stage should just be a repetition or a different flavor of the previous stage. Now, in other companies like Amazon and some other organizations, there's you interview sort of like the recruiter, then you interview with people that are on your level, then on your level but a different team, and then slightly above. And again, it's just because once you understand what's important in your organization, you want to find out as much as possible during the interview process. And so if I went through a 10-stage interview process, but at each stage I was learning something new, and each one had a specific purpose, I wouldn't mind that as much as if I was having 4 conversations back to back and everybody was asking me the same question. And I'm like, wait, didn't you speak to the other person to figure out what this was all about. And so I've spoken from two sides, from both the experience of the candidates and the person actually recruiting, to
Yeah.
understand the principles of the process, and then yeah, running with that.
True. I mean, I definitely understand where some of this decisions come from, but then at the same time, I'm like, you could combine some of this and do like panel interviews so that you have like various people. And I've done quite a number of like panel interviews. They're nerve wracking compared to like one on one, but then I think it's better for everybody. And also some of the case studies, the whole thing of taking a case study, doing it, and then going back again, like time you can get the case study and do it on the day. So I've done case studies as well, and I've done group case studies where it's like gladiator sort of like style of war. I remember doing a case study and we were put like I think 20 of us. It was a graduate role. I hated
Yeah,
that recruitment process. We were put in a boardroom. We were 20 of us, and then it was a case study, and then all of us are supposed to kind of like chip in, and then everybody had somebody tallying kind of like how you perform. It was
yeah,
so nerve-wracking, and you could also see the behaviors of the different candidates in the boardroom. There are those people who want to take lead, the people are more reserved. I'm just like, I felt like there could have been better ways of doing it, but then again, with graduate trainee programs, the applications are so many and people are so many. And you can find like the more outspoken people, the more people are more aggressive are the ones who go through. But I guess if that's the sort of talent you want, I guess it works.
exactly,
um
exactly. So yeah, you kind of need to understand that again. Some companies know this, some companies don't, but the process also tells you the kind of company that it is and what they're looking for. And so if you find yourself not, and again, I think candidates forget that sometimes. Yes, the company is trying to hire you and they're going to give you the money, so it feels like the power is with them, but it's also your life. And so I think at the end of the day, you're also interviewing the company. The more senior you get, the more you start to realize you're also interviewing the company. But obviously, as an early graduate, you're just waiting for the first person to give you an opportunity. So I
right.
do understand that.
Yeah.
But the difference between, and this is a slight side note, but the difference between say an undergrad who's about to be a grad from a very top university and some other university is this matter of confidence, because a Stanford grad or Harvard grad or whatnot, even from the early days, they're already also being very selective about where they're going and why they're going there. And I think it's just part of the confidence that you build from being associated with that kind of brand. But the principle still stays the same, that even if you're early stage talent, at Mess where I was recruiting, some of the folks that impressed us the most were people that didn't need us and communicated that part, not rudely, but it was quite obvious that this would be a mutually beneficial relationship. And I know it's very difficult as an early stage, if there are folks listening to this that are quite early in your journey. It might be like, wait, I don't have any experience, so how can I make it feel like they need me as much as I need them? But I think there's a way around shaping your story, the things that you do, the things that you talk about, how you talk about it, that really shows that. But that's just a side tip.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. And it was exactly what you've mentioned. So from that whole process, with that particular company, you could tell the people that came through. I think at the time it was around 150 graduates that got through, that got like an offer. And we all, because I got an offer, and a lot of us almost came from the same university. We came from the same universities, we came from the same courses, our personalities were very similar. And again, because it's such a huge you do so many rounds from assessment, you pitch to them an idea. It's They're almost having the same person. And for me, the whole recruitment process, I didn't like it. And I was like, I even said no to the offer. And I remember when I turned them down, they were so upset. Like, how could you? And I'm like, I
Yeah.
didn't have a great experience with the whole process. And that's not the type of environment I wanted to be in. And compare that to the other organization that I went with. Very similar process in terms of like the
Hmm.
stages, but I think they approached it in a more personalized,
Human
uh,
way.
personalized way, human way, and I loved it. The same industry, the same stages, but I was like, this other one, what's the point? And I said no, and I'm so glad I did. But yo, you also, as I think, as somebody going through this processes, you also need to be able to say, okay, this is for me, or no, this is not for me. Because the way you experience the company during the recruitment or the hiring process, chances are they're the same. They're going to be the same once you join them. So I think, like you said, it can be very daunting when you're just starting out, but then at the same time, this is your life, and you need to take on ownership of your career. And like you said, some of those strong personalities, I remember when we got into when we were offered the jobs, and we had to go in to take them. They were like physical. That was like back in 2016.
Back.
It was like a physical job offer. Some of them were like asking, do you have any benefits for golfing? Are there any opportunities to further my career? Do you have signing bonuses? And some of us was just looking like, we're just happy to be here.
To be here,
So
exactly.
I think you're right in saying, like, the companies, as much as it's they're recruiting for a role, they're actually looking for specific type of people, which a lot of
Mm.
people don't mention. So I'm so glad you mentioned that. And speaking of talent, and also speaking about the various regions you've worked at, I don't know whether there are any differences when it comes to markets that you've seen, especially around trends, um be it in West Africa, South Africa, or East Africa, because I feel like you've worked in all of those markets, and even like globally, if you've had an opportunity to work with talent, are there any um similarities in the markets? Are there any differences in the markets? And is there importance to sort of localize the strategies when it comes to, like, talent acquisition, or what you're calling talent
Yeah.
acceleration?
Yeah. So obviously there are a lot of anecdotes and stories here that everyone is very familiar with in terms of the different regions, and I'm speaking about Africa specifically. So obviously, there's a general sense of when you're working with West African talent or Nigerians specifically, there's a certain level of energy, hustle, and whatnot that those we tend to bring to the table. If you're looking at Ghana, is a little bit more reserved, but also a little bit more refined in some ways, but also a little bit slower in that sense. Francophone Africa is a whole kettle of fish in itself. South Africa, I think maybe I'll speak from my personal point of view, and I'm not trying to do this as a general sense, but in South Africa, I think there's a lot more structure to the way their work ecosystem is set up. And so employment laws are also taken quite seriously there. And I think that affects the way candidates show up in certain conversations and what their expectations are. So I think generally as a company that's recruited from different markets, each market just has the candidate expectation is different, right from compensation expectations to work culture to just different vibes and energies. And this is everywhere. For example, a UK company that has an American arm, you find that the Americans are willing to work on weekends, but folks in the UK log out on Friday and they're like, see you on Monday in that sort of way, right? So peace out. And so that kind of energy like passes through. I think, I have a friend working in Morocco at the moment, and their culture is also like Friday go out, Monday I come back, right? And so there's some similarities in the sense that I think in Nigeria and Kenya, there's a little bit of a willingness to go overboard, or just go the extra mile in that sort of way. But I think Kenyans price it a lot higher, meaning they require a lot more to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I remember the first time I was trying to hire, someone working in Nairobi, and the person was an intern. And when the person told me the offer they were expected, I'm like, interesting, because in Nigeria, obviously, like this person is probably going to be like a little bit more senior, expecting the same amount. So market realities is obviously, and the cost arbitrage that happens as well. Outside of that, um, I'll say we're much more alike than people would like to think,
True.
not in a bad way, but I'd say we're much more like some of these subtle things are just by extension the markets that people operate in. So if I live in a place where it costs me more to do certain things, I'm going to ask for more. So it's not a case of I'm better than you, it's just the realities of where I am. So that's number one. um, I think when I was at Mest, the technical talent in Kenya, it was higher, but it was also more widespread. So whereas you find like a very, very good, decent software engineer, say in Ghana or in Nigeria, that would be like really good. I think the spread was quite massive. So it's like you have someone who's really good, but everybody else is kind of like not that great. In Kenya, there's like very wide range of folks that are able to like meet a certain threshold in terms of technical skills. But again, I'm speaking from 5 years ago. Things have evolved and changed with AI and everything that's coming around. Um, but yeah, I think those are the main things. Those are the markets I've stayed in. Haven't
Yeah.
really done anything else. But like I said, I think the main thing is just we're a lot similar than we'd like to think.
No, I agree. I think we're very, very similar. I know as Africans, we don't like people generalizing Africa. We're always like, Africa is a continent. It's not a
Yeah.
country. And I agree, right? Because we're very different. We have the borders and everything. We have governments, we have languages, we have cultures, but we are so alike. Anytime you speak to anybody from a different part of the continent and you start talking, you realize, wow, this is very similar to how I grew up in my home country. I'm in London and I
Mm.
interact with so many people from across the world. And when you start looking at like Africans, we have so many similarities, and the differences come in the nuances, like you've mentioned, slight things around personality, slight things around or ways of working or ways of life. But like
Mm.
generally, we are very, very, very similar, like you've mentioned.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So, uh,
Awesome. And then I'd like to us to go back to you making the decision to go to Nairobi or to go to Kenya. And you started out by saying, Ventures for Africa, started with an idea with you and your co-founder having been in Diani, a coastal town in Nairobi, in Kenya. But like how, and I think you also mentioned you still wanted to move anyway. So what drove your decision or your desire to want to move to Nairobi?
I think specifically for the tech ecosystem, it felt like there was a richer ecosystem here, right? Again, it depends on what you're optimizing for. In terms of obviously amount of funding raised and like the big startups that have raised a lot of money, like obviously like you find them in Nigeria. South Africa is like a different kettle of fish entirely. But I
Yeah,
think
it's
in
a
terms
whole
of just
different scenario in South
yeah,
Africa, like across
yeah,
different industries, not just startups, even corporate, and even
yeah,
in the different industries, finance, insurance, creative, it's
exactly.
different. Yeah.
Yeah, you must have to talk about them separately. But I think like the same thing that I said with like just engineering talent and how it felt more widespread here, in Nairobi. I think it's the same thing just generally that in other markets you have such wide extremes. So it's like the difference between the top and the bottom is just a lot, and it makes it difficult to really like in to use economic terms, the middle class doesn't really exist as much in some of these other markets. In Kenya, again, this is relative because I know I might hear someone from Kenya now might be saying, "What do you mean? The middle class doesn't also exist here?" But I mean, relative to other African markets, there's way more of a rich in terms of just diversity and what's going on in the middle sector, which then means and there's an opportunity for a lot more things to play around. In a simple thing as paying for events. You're surprised, right? Like the same kind of event, you try to do it in Ghana or in Nigeria with the same price and all of that. And people don't really pay for it because the culture there and just the way things are set up there, it's not really geared towards that kind of business model in that sort of way. But over here, because the service industry is also quite rich, people are used to paying for services and all these other like additional things, and that shines through in the way the kinds of businesses that are built and what gets built here. So long and short is that I think for us, we felt like there was more to play around with in this market than any other markets that we were in. But we've always been Pan African from day one. So yes, majority of the companies and the talent that we work with is based in East Africa. But I lived in Ghana for 7 years, and we were still doing a lot of business in both Nigeria, Ghana, and even Cameroon, for example. So I think it's just a case of where there was a huge mass of volume going on for us was always here, and it just made sense to try to be closer to what was going on as well.
Okay, makes sense. Makes sense. It Nairobi has a very, very vibrant ecosystem for a lot of things happening, be it startup, property, investment. And as a Kenyan and a lot of Kenyans who are going to be watching this, I think we because we want Kenya to do better and we want better for Kenya, we're always looking at, the things that are not working, but not always looking at what is working. So I will give that to Nairobi. I think there's a lot happening. I don't think as Kenyans we appreciate. So it's
Yeah.
great to
No,
dive.
yeah, it's quite biblical, but also just the way humans work, right? The things that are closest to you are the things that are more likely to be taken for granted.
True.
And so it's why traveling and going places and being places is helpful if you have the ability to, because I think just increasing your surface area and your perspective gives you a better sense of, again, not to take things and be like, oh, okay, because we're better than somebody else, then I should be happy. No, it's just putting things in perspective, because there's also the risk that if you don't appreciate the things that are in front of you, you're so hell bent on chasing something else that you lose sight of what was really important. But the thing about the thing that you're looking for next is that it needs to be built on top of what you currently have. But you can't build on top of something that you're not grateful for or you don't appreciate. So it's just the way life has been designed, unfortunately, unfortunately.
True, true. I think the other thing I wanted us to discuss is, so you've been in this talent space for quite a while. I don't know if there are any new emerging trends that you're seeing, be it from the startups founders or the startups coming up, or just the talents that you'd like to share. I know a lot of people are talking about AI, but like from a talent point of view, like what are some of the trends that you've been seeing, especially on the continent?
Mm, trends. It's very sometimes difficult to point at this because you see the trends that you're primed to see sometimes, not necessarily what the actual reality is.
Yeah.
But I'll say a lot more people are, and this has always been the case with startups, but we have like different groups of people that will commit to one startup, and if the startup goes well, they're kind of like there. And then we have people that are a lot more willing to explore in terms of, if a few things aren't quite right, I'm going to like leave and look for something else. I think that's the general mindset with our generation and younger. But I think most in more trends perspective, I think people are now looking at careers as portfolios as well, as opposed to careers the way we naturally know them. And this is not just about job hopping, because that's not a portfolio, that's just you job hopping. It's about understanding the different phases of your career that you're at and figuring out how to bring different pieces together to put a coherent narrative, right? And I think a lot more people are being more strategic about the moves they make and why they make them and the kind of spaces they're getting into. And I think this is just, a byproduct of the fact that the more opportunities and the more diversity happens, the more there's different pathways to take. And so there's no one way to be successful or one way to enjoy or one way to live your best life. And I think that's caused people to start thinking very differently about their careers. And the startups are usually the first place you start to see signs of this. And like, because we're always quick to take on new trends, new things, and yeah, everyone is experimenting because there's constraints everywhere. So I think within the startup space, you're seeing more of that, happening in that sort of way. Is what I would say is a trend. The next big thing obviously is AI and what it's doing, but that comes with its own kettle of fish. I'd say, is there anything else I can point out as more profound? Nothing really. That I think a lot
Yeah.
of things,
Talent is
nothing's really
talent.
new.
People remain the same over the years. And like you say that, I think, again, I also agree that has seems to be the biggest change. And I think it started with maybe millennials where they were like, I'm not staying in one job for 30 years, right? I
Yeah.
might stay in a company for 3 years, 5 years, because there's particular skills I want to acquire and the particular, projects I want to pick up. And yeah, it's been kind of interesting seeing that the Gen Z are doing it differently. I don't know if you want to talk about that because people are always talking about like Gen Z at the workplace, and
Yeah.
sometimes I feel like the Gen Z don't get enough credit. A lot of people are always talking quite about the challenges of having Gen Z in the talent pool, like in the various roles, but very few people talk about the great things that Gen Z are doing. I don't know if you'd love to touch on that slightly.
I'll be honest. Outside of what happens on social media in terms of just the things people talk about, it's not really been my experience per se. In terms of, like you said, I think we have a tendency to want to label things and use that label to explain things in a way that are quite nuanced. Because yes, it's like there's a generation that has certain trends and tendencies, but then each individual is very different, and the environment will also produce different results. Because you and I both know they're Gen Zs or millennials that are in certain spaces that are doing the things that they do that feel unlike their generation. But then it's an environment and a personality thing that affects that. So I'm always very like a bit, you know, wary about this. Like obviously, like there's some trends that, they're a lot more vocal, a lot more willing to put things up on social media. There's all of that that goes on. But I think in our own little ways, there were things like that in our generation and generations before. The tools are just different. And so it means the expression is a little bit different, but the expression has always been there in its own little kind of way. So um, I think from a psychology point of view, there's not so much that I would point at. And maybe it's just because I guess I haven't, I don't know. I want to say I've not worked with a lot of Gen Z, but I think I have. I just don't identify them as that. So it's a whole other thing, right? And I think um, it's always helpful to focus on the main thing and don't use that label, because if you call things the way, if you call whatever you call things is what they will be. So if you keep hampering on the fact that you're Gen Z, you're Gen Z, you're different, it will keep manifesting itself as that difference. But if you focus on the principles, I want someone who's hardworking, who's creative, who's ambitious. That's a trend that goes across different generations, but it's expressed in different ways. And so that's just my belief, but I could be naive about what's going on in the space right now. So
Yeah.
don't take my word
Well,
for it.
I've worked with a lot of Gen Zs actually, at my various corporate jobs. Because I was like in consulting, and consulting, they take like graduate trainees every single year in quite huge numbers. And
Yeah,
I think they were awesome. They were vocal for sure, more than myself and my millennial peers, which is a great thing. Sometimes I'll just like, yeah, I'm in agreement. I'm like, they need to share
yeah.
that with like senior leadership.
Yeah, and funny thing about being vocal is that, like, that's why I said it's just the expression that is different, because
Yes.
we still had the thoughts as millennials or as boomers that this
Mm,
thing is a thing. It's just that we didn't express it in
yeah.
the way that Gen Zs currently are.
Yeah.
Is that you express it with your counterparts to be like, I don't even like what's going on here, all those sorts of things. And so for me, it's like at the end of the day, expression still happens, but the point is where it's happening, and that's what the difference is. And that for me is not so much a generational change as opposed to just what's going on generally in
Yeah.
the space. But anyways, that's just my hot take.
Yeah, so there's that, and also something that I also picked up with Gen Z is they have less to lose than we did as millennials or the older generation. Sometimes they're like, it's not by force. I'll go home, which is
Yeah,
great, right? Because again, with the workplace, you're giving something for something in return. So, and both parties have to benefit from whatever is happening. It's an exchange. So if one party is not getting what they signed up for, you know but like again, they're very vocal, they're not afraid to advocate for themselves, and if something is not working for them, then they're like, yeah, it's not working for them. I think there's less stigma with that generation with the whole job hopping, because I think, in previous generations, you needed to stay somewhere for 5 years, 10 years,
yeah,
whereas their generation, they're more than willing to do 2 years or even sometimes 1 year. And even the way they work is different from us and from a lot of the older generation. But again, there's nothing new there, because even the older generation thought the same about
said
millennials
the
when
same
they
thing
came to
about
the
us.
workplace, or
Yeah,
like what's happening. But it's fresh ideas, it's fresh talent, it's new ways of working, which sometimes can feel very uncomfortable for people who don't like change. And so yeah, it's very interesting seeing
yeah,
that. But something also I've quite appreciated with Gen Z is how they're creative in how they approach work. They're very creative, and I also feel like the more you're able to let them take charge on some of these things, the more they'll surprise you. Because you could be very hell-bound in wanting to do something in one way, but then you give them an opportunity and they surprise you. So, yeah, I mean, it can be challenging when, you're a bit iffy about change, but at the same time, maybe it's what you need.
yeah. And like I said, none of these conversations are new under the sun, which is why I said it's more just my way of approaching life in general, maybe, which is
Yeah.
why maybe this conversation and this part of the conversation isn't necessarily triggering me the same way it would for other people.
Yeah.
Is that for me, I abstract away from a lot of like coverings and just go into what the essence of the matter is, right? I'm generally a creative person, which means I'm more open to change. So maybe that's also what's coming through here. Where
True.
if I'm working with it, like, yeah, so it's different if you're doing something and the result is negative. Then we have a talk about, okay, yeah, you did this thing, but it didn't really get the results that we wanted to do. So what can we do about it? Versus you're wrong because you're doing it differently, right? And so, that's kind of like how I go through life in a kind of way. And so I think, yeah, I don't really. I think the more things that surprise me about Gen Z is just more about, because we're in this workspace where we're kind of in the same stage of life, but we've had very different backgrounds. And so
Mm.
that's what surprises me the most. Maybe I'm making certain references and somebody's just not getting it. That's where me, I drag Gen Zs. I don't like, that's where I'll drag you. Like,
With the
why don't you know
music,
this
we are
person?
stuck in the
With the most,
2000s.
you understand? I know. So that's how me I drag,
Yeah.
and all of that. And just in this, I guess it's the same thing with every generation, because there's some things that we did that we felt like, were amazing, and our parents and generation were looking at you like,
Yeah.
you think you're doing something new, but and
It's
then when they tell you that it's not new, you're like, there's no way I'm
yeah.
doing the same thing you were doing. But in
Yeah.
reality, it's kind
Yeah.
of it's
Well, for
kind
me,
of
I
the
think it also
same.
helps that I have three younger siblings. So so the Gen Z,
You
the
can,
young generation is very, very close. Like I've experienced it very close. So I don't see anything very different or strange with working with somebody who's younger. So again,
yeah,
we
exactly.
could have very different experiences from other people out there. But yeah, as we
Mm.
try to wind up this discussion, it's been amazing, by the way, Toby. But I think the last question I'll ask before we go to a quick round fire again is, if you had to bet on one thing that will define the future of African talent over the next 5 years, what would it be?
um, One thing that would change the future of African talent.
Define the future of African
Define.
talent over the next 5 years. What would it be? It's a tough one.
Oh, yeah, because I think when we qualify something with Africa, I realize that a lot of the changes that we like to see, we can't really bypass certain things.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that I'm sitting with is just the enablement of the governments and the spaces that we're in. I think if you look at even in the startup ecosystem, some of the biggest players that we've had in those spaces, the first customers were like the government, because they're the ones that can generate money out of nothing but pay for value, and that value ends up creating more value. So we can try all the amazing things. AI can come and lift a few people off the ground, all of that sort of things. But I think it's the thing that would define African talents is just like being willing to think about things differently, and again approach problems from that point of view. And again, it feels like a very boring answer, but I don't think there's one dramatic thing, because yes, I could say AI, but it depends on how you go ahead using and thinking about how that changes things. People
Yeah.
thought it was going to be, the internet has done a lot for us, right, in that sort of way, but we know there's still significant things out there that the internet is not going to fix for us. And so for me, I think it's more a mindset thing. I'm sorry for the boring answer, but I think, yeah, if I was going to change anything that would really lift the talent space and just the whole continent as a whole, I think it's just the way we think about how we run our countries and our governments. I think there's so much that we're having to work against in those spaces, and we could use that innovation elsewhere. We shouldn't have to be worried about it. Some of the things we're worried about is what I think is holding us back, and not
Yeah.
technology.
Yeah, so infrastructure, government policies, governance, strategy, sometimes from the bigger players, like you said, making, for example, countries an attractive investment for some of the big corporates. It means people get hired, the economy is better off, people are able to
Hmm.
purchase products and services. It has a whole ripple effect, but then it has to start from like the top. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Government has a place to play in our ecosystem. We have to make sure that there are structures, there's governance, there's policies that is able to attract the big money, because startup money is great, investors is great, but you can't compare you can't compare that to investment that government has, or the kind of like
Yeah.
resources or the pool government has. And I'm seeing a lot of African governments trying to attract investment onto the continent and also just put structures to allow better working environment for this organization. And I think that's a fantastic answer. I don't think it's boring in any way. Because even with AI, it
Yeah.
still does need government buy-in, right? It needs institutional buy-in. On Kenyan side, we called a few of the government and public companies like parastatal. So they still need to get buy-in to attract this
Mm.
massive investments, right? Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
okay, great. And then now to the fun part. A quick fire
Mm.
round, the final one, I promise. First question. What's one mindset shift you think African professionals or talents need to make to thrive globally or in global organizations?
Spirit of excellence.
Okay, cool.
That's I can explain that, but I think
Maybe
yeah.
explain it a little bit because I'm big on
Okay.
like African and Black excellence.
Yes. No. So I mean, it's wrapped up in the whatever your hands find to do it well. I think a lot of times people do the bare minimum, and in different ways. Like you'll be getting paid a lot of money, but I don't think we're as bought into our craft as if you I don't know, I don't think it's a nature thing, because if you go back to previous eras like the Benin Empire, the craftsmen, and how colorful some of our languages are, I think there was a lot of emotion and excellence put into the craft. But I think as things have just evolved, people have lost that, and so you find somebody in their little space, but they don't really care. um we watch all these videos and you see like a doorman or a cleaner in China or something, and the way they're doing their thing, you're like, is it this cleaning that they're doing that it feels so rich? I think that is missing. We need more of that. People just being ruthlessly excellent about the little thing, whatever it is that's in your hands, and not just doing one thing to get to the next thing. I think we're missing that beauty. And there's a lot of beauty in life that comes with doing something excellently well, no matter how small it is.
Okay, great. I mean, I will kind of counter that and say I think African talent is excellent, especially from where I sit. But that's not my story to tell. It still be. Another question: remote work opportunity or threat for African talent?
Um, I would say opportunity. I take a more opportunistic view about things that add more flexibility. Obviously, it increases the competition you have to deal with, but I think there's always a space to play, because what's the alternative, right? If you, I think we've seen in economics and everything, the more open something is, the better it is for everybody involved, and closed things don't necessarily get as successful. So, yeah, remote work for everyone.
Okay, one founder or startup in Africa you're currently watching closely.
Mhm. uh, yeah, one founder that
or
I'm watching
several,
closely.
or several if you have more than one.
I'll be honest, I haven't been paying that close of an
Mm-hmm.
attention to like individuals in particular
Mm-hmm.
per se. But I think the folks at Paystack are quite an interesting one to look at, more because obviously the fanfare with the acquisition that happened in 2020, but what has happened since then and what it means to actually continue to build a business that, like, for all intents and purposes, is essentially like Coca-Cola going to acquire someone and they need to continue running the thing. So I think it's been quite impressive how they've continued to run, because now they're becoming, in the same word as you speak about some of the guys that we've known as established corporates, Paystack is becoming one of those. And I think that's quite impressive. So I think it's less so much about the particular founders, but just the organization as a whole that I would say I'm watching. Is there anyone else? I can be quite, not contrarian, but me and the African tech ecosystem, we have a love-hate relationship. So let's
Yeah.
just park it there for now.
Okay,
Yeah.
next question. So you're originally from Nigeria. You said you're not from Lagos. Which city do you come from
Yeah.
in Nigeria?
So, well,
Or
the
state?
state is called, yeah, so it's called Oyo State, but from the city of Ibadan. I was born in Ibadan,
Ah,
but
okay.
I guess my hometown is a little bit different from that, but it's still Oyo State. So
Okay.
Oyo State is kind of like what 100 and something kilometers away from Lagos. So yeah, it's not too
Okay. So
far.
what do you miss most when you're away from home?
I've been away from home forever, so I'm not the best person to ask this question. So
But I'm listening into
uh,
you now.
I'll say I miss the food. I
What
think the food
about family,
is
friends,
so
weather?
that's why I said I'm not the best person because my
Mhm.
family is already scattered across different spaces. I have
I
more
see.
family technically in the UK than anywhere else these days.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the weather, I never really liked Nigerian weather. I'm more amenable to different things, but the weather here in Kenya is not bad at all. Like you don't need to be beaten by the sun as much, so that's great. It
Because you
gets
live in
cold, but
Nairobi, if you lived in other places, maybe a little bit like up north, or east. So I'm from Kitui, and Kitui is very
yeah,
sunny, compared to like Nairobi.
Nairobi, yeah. Also, it gets quite sunny. Like I was on the coast,
Yes,
December two
yes,
years, and it was ridiculously hot and very
it's hot.
uncomfortable. I'm like, yeah,
December
I
and
don't miss
January
this.
is hot in the
Yeah,
coast.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So,
But that's a plus
but
because
yeah,
you come to some of these countries and the beaches are cold. You're like, why is our beach cold?
I know, right? It's like I was in Cape Town at some point, and we are doing like kite surfing,
Hmm.
and it was I don't know, it wasn't I don't know, it was cold. I was like, this is not enjoyable. Like I'm struggling to stay warm.
I was
I don't even
coming for
understand
the
what.
beaches and warm weather and sunny, and then you
Yeah,
get the water is so cold. But
so cold.
anyway,
Like no,
yeah.
that's yeah, no,
Okay,
no
cool.
way.
Last question, I promise. What's one mistake you've made as a founder that others can learn from, or maybe not mistake, but as a learning point?
Um, I'd say like overthinking things. And trying to wait for things to be perfect in this kind of way. But yeah, overthinking things. I think there are a lot of things that I could have learned a lot quicker. Um, than than the time it took me to learn them, and some of it was just hesitation. And I don't think it's a problem that would ever go away because you're always going to balance between, yeah, I don't want to put this out there or do this, or there's just some friction you always have to going to deal with. I think as a founder, as a human being in general, is about figuring out how to make that process a lot quicker, because yeah, some things don't let you know what you need to do next until they get out in the form in which they exist. And the longer you wait, the longer it will take to learn that lesson sometimes. And so that's not to say put out shoddy work because I think anything for me, like balance is important, but it's like
Yeah,
navigating that balance is where the wisdom, comes in
yeah.
as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's a perfect answer. And with that, that comes to the end of the session. Hope you've enjoyed this, Toby. And I don't know if there's anything I've left out that I'd like to mention. I know you guys are having the talent social very soon. I don't know. Would you like to speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, so for folks in Nairobi, for now, fingers crossed, but we run it's now a monthly event called the Nairobi Talent Social. And essentially, it's just we looked at what happens in the space when it comes to folks looking for opportunities. And it can be a quite like an inhuman process, like you're chatting to ATSs, submitting applications, not getting callbacks. And the reality is that even with all the technology that happens, we know from recruiters and hiring managers that the best hires happen personally, right? So that's why a lot of folks lean on their personal networks. So our idea for the social is just to bring together a space where we give those two groups an opportunity to interact in a little bit more of a low risk way. So obviously people attend conferences and you sign up for a conference and you're hoping you'll network. But if you're looking to get a job, you don't know who's looking, you don't know who's hiring, you don't know if what anybody is there for in the conference. And so you always have to navigate and tiptoe around these conversations. But in the social, everyone is there knowing that I'm either hiring or looking to get hired. And so it's just straightforward. And that barrier really helps even the introverts get into the room. And we're very intentional about how we design the spaces and the experience itself to make sure you come away with something. So it's actually short term, it's a recruitment event, but it's not a career fair. It's really just more social where you can get
Yeah.
to meet with recruiters and other talent as well. The other thing I'll shout out is the career design lab that we run. And so the way I think about it is that if you didn't go to an international university, the last time you probably heard from your school was when you graduated. And so we've all had to navigate our career journeys on our own in terms of, okay, when do I know when it's time to shift? How do I know where to shift to? What are my skills? What roles make sense for my skills? All those sorts of questions. And so we've essentially taken everything we've learned over the last 5 years working with mid to senior professionals, and we've designed what we're calling a lab. And essentially just a one-on-one experience where there's a start and end point, and we help you improve your job search strategy and help you navigate the career market in terms of all the insights we have, working on your resumes, interview prep, and just think of it as a career services support system, but that is accessible to you regardless of if you went to our school or not. But yeah,
Yeah.
so Talent Social, Career Design Lab, those are the two big things I'll call out today.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Toby. And for people in London, we have the Jasiri Network Investment Edition, which I talked extensively on the last session with Joe Kinvey on the 4th of October. So I'd love to meet a lot of you there. But yeah, I mean, how to connect with Toby or Venture for Africa, you can find them on all the social media platforms. You can connect with Toby on LinkedIn. You can also connect with Venture for Africa on LinkedIn. You can search for them online. Myself, I'm quite active on LinkedIn as well. On Instagram, if you Google me, you'll be able to find me. If you Google Jasiri Network, you'll be able to find it. But yeah, this has been fantastic, Toby. Thank you so much for joining us. And to everybody, thank you and goodbye. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you for having me. Bye, everyone.